Okay, the way I like to view the files is to see how they're organized in one another. So you can see within the hard drive, there are these folders. I'm only interested in applications, so I click there, and within that folder, you can see all of the applications that are in here. I only want Illustrator, so I click on, single click on that folder, and it shows me all the folders within that folder. So you can see the tree, the way these things are organized. And this is the last one. This is your application, and it does tell you that what kind of file it is, and it is an application. So now either here or here, you simply double click, and that launches the application. And then you should see it in the dock when it's launched. And this is what you should see. There isn't much here. But the key is if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see it says Illustrator. We are in Illustrator. And we have the default settings set right here for the way it is laid out. Over to the left. See this on the double arrow tab. These are our tools. I can view my tools in a traditional way, where it's two columns of tools, or if I want a little bit more space, I can click on this double arrow tab, and it's a little bit more streamlined on the left here. I can also click on that tab, and I can pull them out, or I can rearrange them. So, if I want it apart from it, just click on the orange part and drag it around. So this could be any place you want it to be. And these are your tools we'll talk about in greater depth. And if you want, you just bring it back over here, and it locks it back in. To add functionality for these tools, we have our palettes on the right. And again, depending on how you want to view them, you will, if I only want to see the color palette, I click on it and it becomes visible. And then if I want to hide it, I click on the double arrow tab and it hides it. If I want to see symbols, then I click here and it shows me my symbols, my swatches or brushes. Now, all of these are empty at the moment because we don't have anything open. And if I want to close it, I close it here. There's another menu here that as we begin to select tools of the new file, it will add functionality up here. It's a little menu bar that's white at the moment. So we have all of our tools, but in order to draw, I think in literal terms and visual terms, being trained as a traditional artist and illustrator, I need a piece of paper. I need something to draw on. So we go to File, New. We're going to create a brand new document. If you have already created a document and saved it, then you can go to File, Open. Or if there was something there, you would say Open Recent Files. There would be maybe 5 files listed, something that you've already saved that you could open from there. Or we could browse. I want to create a brand new document, so that's what I think all of you guys should do. Or you'll notice, if I cancel that, there are these little scribblies and letters next to it. These are the keyboard equivalents. So for a brand new file, it's Command N, or the Apple key. If you look at your Apple key, it's the key on either side of the space bar. So if you don't want to use the tabs up there, just hit Command N, and you get to the same place. And it says, it prompts you with a window, and it asks you, we're going to create a new document. At this time, if you wish, you can name it. So I'll call it Memo 1. What kind of document do we want? In this class, we'll be working for print. In the print mode. But if we were designing for the web, maybe you would want a web format instead. If you were designing for video or you were designing for a mobile device, then you would want to select one of those. And the size of the screens and options would be different. So for this class, we principally work with print. The next is the paper size. In this class, we will work, I won't say exclusively, but mostly with letter size paper, which is 8.5 by 11. But if you want legal size, tabloid, or custom size, or any of these others, you can create whatever paper size you want in here. So I'm just going to select letter. The next, by default, it measures in points, which is a unit of measurement. For our purposes, I would just assume measure in inches. And you'll notice when I switch from points, 612 points by 792 points is equivalent to 8.5 by 11 inches. And later when we talk about typography, this semester I will explain in the later depth what points and typings are. So I would just assume measure in inches. Then the last thing that we need to deal with is, do we want our paper to be vertical or portrait format, or do we want it to be horizontal or landscape format? There are a few advanced tabs here. I'm going to select vertical for the moment. Color mode, I will leave CMYK. The color modes are for print, art, or CMYK. That stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Or typically, if you're designing for the web, it would be RGB, red, green, blue. And then if you do choose to rasterize any of your elements in here, or use raster effects, we have a default setting of 300 pixels per inch, which is print for high, and it's high resolution. Preview mode, just default. It's fine. And as soon as we click OK, boom, our screen is filled. And you'll notice that we have a little black outline. That represents the paper size. The area around the paper is the clipboard, or it's the paste board, not clipboard, but paste board. So if I were to come over here and make a little shape, let's bring it in color, and fill it with blue. This square now, this rectangle, is a part of my document, but it will not print. The only part that will print is that which exists inside the little black rectangle. That's our piece of paper. So again, if we use the literal terms, or the literal way of thinking, you have your desk. And on your desk, I have a book, and I have a pen, and I have my sweater, and I have a computer, and I have a piece of paper. Well, the only thing that's going to print is the piece of paper. So that's what we have here. But I have all these other things on my desktop. Similarly, I can clutter it with all kinds of images. But the only thing that will print is that which is in the rectangle.
When you save that,
they remain there.
That's part of the document.
Yes. Okay. Now, you'll notice that now that I have a document that I'm working on, that my menu at the top here, at the top, is filled before it was blank. And you'll notice that now when I select swatches or I select symbols, there's all kinds of stuff here that I have available to me that I didn't have before when there was no document. So, before I talk about the individual tools and the menu bar and the palettes, I want to talk about vector versus bitmap. What we're working with in Illustrator is an object-based program. It's vector. Everything you create is a separate little object. It's a separate little thing. And if it made sense to you what he was saying with the raster or bitmap, is that what you have, depending on the resolution of your image, all you're doing is you're turning on and off, or you're changing a grid of pixels. Depending on the bit depth of your video card will determine how many different colors or how many options you have for colors can go into each one of those pixels. So when you look at images that are photographic, that have smooth, continuous tones, that have subtle gradations, that have really nicely rounded, realistic-looking forms, typically they're done in a program like Photoshop that are bitmap or /raster programs. When you see images that are 2D, like this design on the cover, it could be done in a bitmap program, but it's not likely. They've done it in vector or object-oriented programs. Now, to drive home the difference between pixels and objects, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to come over here to my basic shapes. I'm going to use the ellipse tool, and I'm going to create a blue circle. Okay? And I'm going to make a copy of it. And now I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to look at this really close. And you can see those edges are just as smooth can be. Really nice. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this one and I'm going to convert it to a bitmap. Right now, since we're working native in Illustrator, everything is vector. But I have the option, if I wish to use some of the filters or effects, to convert some of it to a bitmap. So what they've done over the years is they've combined elements of Photoshop and Illustrator. And now with Photoshop, they've combined elements of Illustrator and Photoshop. And they are distinctly different animals, that now they're forcing together. And if you don't understand how each works, it can be sometimes frustrating. So I'll select this one, I'll go to Object, and I have the option here to rasterize. It allows me to convert this to a high-res image. I'm going to convert it to a low-res image, a screen image, to show you the difference, to see how different it can be. I'll click OK. Now when you look at that, it's converted this to those little squares he was talking about. Looks pretty different, doesn't it, when you're zoomed way in at 2,400%. If I zoom back out, even at 100%, they look the same. But if I zoom in any more, all I'm doing with that bitmap or raster object is I'm enlarging those little squares and they're getting bigger and bigger. That's why in my Photoshop class I emphasize again and again and again, or I think I do, that once it's scanned at a particular resolution, you do not want to enlarge the image. You don't want to increase the size of it in any way, because all you're doing is making the pixels bigger. But that is one of the advantages to working with vectors, because they are defined, those shapes are defined by mathematics, is that it keeps your file size by comparison very small. They are also resolution, they're independent, or they're dependent on the output device that you're using for the quality of image. So if I have a really high-end, beautiful printer, and I can print something for a billboard that's the size of that wall, I can start with a teeny tiny image and enlarge it to the size of the wall, and it will look the same. It will have the same quality. So for years, for billboards, for things that even you could take a little 1 megabyte floppy disk, and you could hold a whole bunch of information on it, and that was why it was considered advantageous to work in this field. Unlike a bitmap program like Photoshop, they're just memory lines. As soon as you turn it to 300 pixels per inch, you're talking about 30 megabytes, hundreds of megabytes of file size, not just a few. Okay, so does that sort of make sense? Now, the other aspect of this is that if you understand that this is, think about it as objects. Everything that I made here is a separate object that works independently of one another. This is something else that it's different. And I'll get rid of this. So we're working with just vectors here. Now, even though these exist on the same layer, and this is going to make it confusing, because I only have one layer here. Within that layer, each of these objects are layered on top of one another. You cannot have two objects occupy the same space. So every time you create a new object, it is by default automatically layered on top of the last. You can always reorder them, but they're just by default. So for example, what does that mean? If I were to do the that little, what is it, the MasterCard logo, if I pick for this one and I make this red over here, and I make this yellow, and I overlap. If I wanted to make that shape, I only need to make two circles and overlap it, and what you see is what is printed. But in fact, they are two separate entities layered on top of one another. So if you can think of these as kind of a collage, you can also work like a jigsaw puzzle so that they fit together like this if you want. Or you can work with them so in fact they are layered on top of one another, like taking little strips of paper and creating a little montage or collage of paper layered on top of one another, and when you're done, getting a full-blown image. Now, most of the stuff that we start with are generally fairly two-dimensional, looking and flat and graphic and not very realistic. The more sophisticated you get with the program, with this program, and the more you use it, oftentimes you want to create something that has more of a dimension, like some of those products that I showed you. And there are tools to do that, but it gets more complicated. That's why we start with basic shapes, like working with paper cutouts. And we do the deep scene, and we do the mask, and then move on to something more complicated. Okay? Now, these can all be reordered. And you were saying, what if I want the red one on top? How do I do that? I mean, I can move these back and forth all day and it won't change. But what I can do is select one, and there's a variety of ways that I can do this. For every way that I show you today, there's probably at least 3 or 4 different ways of doing what I'm going to do. I can go to Object Arrange, and I can say, bring the front, and now it's on top. So we can move these up and down, just like you have 52 cards in a deck of cards, and you can take one card out, and you can move it up and down. Okay?
Can you go to the path and then move the path up? You know what I'm talking about? Where you have the layer and then the path?
No, I'm not sure. We can go to layers.
And move the yellow one on top of the red?
Yes, that would be another way. So I can take this one from here, and now I'll move it back on top. I'll just take and just move this whole thing and move it out and move it to the So that would be another way to move it. Is that what I said there are a variety of ways of doing it. Okie doke. So that gives you, difference between vector and bitmap. And also understand that we are working in object-based, so that every object you create is a separate entity. It is layered on top of one another. Okay, there are a number of ways of selecting objects. We have 6 objects on the screen. And I'm going to show you a variety of different ways of selecting them. And again, you can either try to follow along, or you can just watch and then refer to the book and go back to it. One of the easiest ways of selecting is just to use the selection tool and click, and that selects it. And now you'll notice that you see the bounding box, and you see anchor points, and you see a little blue outline. That lets you know that it's selected, and once it's selected, you can change any of the properties of that object. You can change its fill, you can change its stroke, You can move anchor points, you can do whatever you're gonna do. To deselect, you move outside and click, and that deselects. Now nothing is selected. To select multiple objects so that they behave as one can be done a variety of different ways. So everybody ready for the grand tour of this? One of the easiest ways of selecting multiple objects is to shift click. To select one, and let's say I want this fish selected also. So I hold down the shift key and I click it, and it has both of these selected. These are not selected because notice that the anchor points and the outline are not there. And if I hold down the shift key and I select this one, then those three are selected. To prove that just those three are selected, if I click on any one of these three and drag, notice that they both move. They're all three move in unison. If I wish to enlarge all three at once, I can click and drag. They all enlarge uniformly. Okay, so shift clicking, and then to deselect, move outside. And click. That's another useful way. We can also use the lasso tool. The lasso tool.
Kurt.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When you save the file, what format?
Or Illustrator files AI. Just do a save as, and it should be Illustrator. Let me see. Oh, you don't have it open in Illustrator. This is open in Preview. And that happens sometimes. So what you need to do is open Illustrator first. It's not open. So go to Applications. And then open Illustrator. And then take the file. And you'll see the Illustrator icon down here. Click on the Illustrator file and just drag it onto the icon of the application, and it will load it in Illustrator. Okay? So let's open it now. Okay. Look inside your CD. You're going to do, you can either try to follow along with me, or if that gets to be a bit much, just watch it. And then there should be enough time afterwards to work on those. You should be able to do everything in class. Now, okay. So really, if you get lost when you're if you're trying to follow along with me, then don't just watch. And I know that we're working at probably at a quicker pace early on to get everybody up to speed, but there will be adequate time to work on these in class. You should be able to finish everything in class. Okay, the lasso tool. The lasso tool, I can draw so around these two, and that highlights those two. Just another way of selecting. Move outside and deselect. The magic wand tool. Magic wand tool works a little differently. I tried this the other day. If you want, for example, just the red ones to be selected, if I click there, notice that both red are selected. You can also click and drag, and when you do so, notice a little bounding box that appears. The rubber band. whatever you want to call it. And then anything that's contained within that will be selected. Again, when you move outside, you click and deselect. So anytime you want to make a change to an object, and that's doing is something as simply moving it, it has to be selected. When you want to leave it alone, you deselect it. Now, nothing will happen to it. But if I want to change this to orange, it has to be selected. There are exceptions, that's not always true. But now, there's also something called the direct selection tool, and that's what the white arrow is. So let me select and zoom in on just this plane. And you'll notice it's comprised, you can see, probably not very well, but there is, excuse me, a blue bounding box around it. But what you can see clearly is that there's an anchor point here. It's a little blue square, a little blue square, a little blue square, a little blue square, here, 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 here. Actually, every time the line changes direction, there's another anchor point. Each of these anchor points can be selected individually and manipulated. There are corner points and there are curve points. How do you tell which is which? Is that I'm going to deselect, and then with the direct selection tool, I'm going to click on one of them. And when I do, you'll notice that these little tangent handles appear. That tells me that this, in fact, is a curve point, because these tangent handles allow me to control the curve of this spline curve on either side. So I can also click on the anchor point itself, and maybe I want the nose to be longer. I can move it separately from the whole object. Does that make sense? What if I want the nose to be more bulbous? I can click here, and I can pull that out. I can click here, and I can pull that out. Now, the way that this is set up, these tangent handles, it's like a teeter-totter. When you pull one down, the other end goes up. So when I click here, notice how it changes the configuration. Sometimes that's what you want, sometimes that's not what you want. So what if you want to disengage them? You want them to work independently of one another. That is where the pen tool that we will get to hopefully by the end of the week or the starting of next week. We use this convert point tool. That's what this one is here. It looks like a little carrot. That's what it's called. And if I use that and I click on here, notice now it's independent. And as soon as I'm done with that, I let it go and I go back to the direct selection tool. Now when I click on here, this is independent. When I click on here, when I click on this one is independent too. If I want them connected again, you go back to the convert anchor point tool, and I click on this, and notice that it converts to a corner point here. If I click on it again and I drag, it pulls out the tangent handles, and by default they are connected. Don't worry about this part too much, because when we get to the pen tool, we will be covering how to control the points in much greater detail. I just want you to see that every time you notice an anchor point, that it can be manipulated independently of everything else on that path. You can also add anchor points, you can remove anchor points, you can really start with a very basic shape and come up with something very complex when you're done, or vice versa. Start with a very complex shape and end up with a very simple one, depending on what you want to do. There's also the group selection tool. Right now, oh, come on. Let's see if I can undo it. I've got enough undos. What if I want these to behave as a group? While they're both selected, they are a group. So when I click and I drag on one, they both move. They both will rotate, they will both resize, they will do whatever. But what if I have drawn a logo that has type, that has a mark, has a number of elements to it that I want to behave as one thing? By selecting, and just to show you, I can come down here and also select this one too. I'm going to shift click. So I only have these three selected, so they will now, when I either go to object, and I select group, or if you can remember, G for group, so Command G. Now anytime I select one, notice all three are selected. So that they will now, as long as I want them to behave as a group, be a group. If I want to manipulate one independent of the rest of the group, I have to use this tool right here. I got this out of here. There's the direct selection tool. This one is the group selection tool. And what the group selection tool allows you to do is not to select a group, but actually select elements of a group. It's sort of a misnomer. I mean, it's not named properly. It's a part of a group selection tool is what it's doing. So now, notice that these three are selected, but when I select this, I can come in here and I can select just this one. And now I can move it, and I can deselect it. And now I use my selection tool and I select it. Notice still all three are still part of the group. So they can be changed independently of one another. I can come back with the group selection tool and select this, and maybe I want to change it to pink. And then I come back with my selection tool and I select it, and again, all three are still part of the group. So you can still manipulate the parts independently, but they're still part of a group. If you wish to ungroup something, you can go to Object, Ungroup. Now when I deselect it, I select them. They're independent. So you can remember, you can always undo things that you do. Undo a few times. It's still part of the group, and since I undid, ungroup, and back to where I was. There's another nifty trick too, that if you want. It's under Select. You can say Same, and you'll notice same blending mode, same fill and stroke, same fill color, same opacity, same stroke color, same stroke weight. Now, he had a photograph that he converted to, I'm sorry, don't do you? Okay. It'll take me over now. Maybe by the 15th. Okay. I'll know who you are, I just won't remember your name. So if I were to come back here, and let's select the three of these. And I'm going to select stroke here. And I'm going to give each of these a red stroke. So they're all three. Now, even though this is a red object, it has a red stroke. Now, because it blends with the other, you really can't fill, you can't see it, but it is a stroke. So now I can come in here and I can select one of these. And I can go to Select, and I'll say, Same stroke color. And you'll notice those three are selected. Even though they're separate looking, they're very different looking objects because they share the same stroke color, or it could be stroke weight, or it could be fill color. And it can make it very easy, especially fill color, to select dissimilar objects and not have to worry, have I missed one? They're all selected. easy. Okay. This is a pretty nifty part here. Here is the finished part. This is the Martha Stewart part. This is what you start with. This is what it's supposed to look like when you're done. This is fundamentally how these illustrations work. Okay? Now, if you really want to get a sense of how each of these objects are layered on top of one another, you need to have the layer panel up. And you'll notice what they've done. They have separated each flower on its own individual layer. And that's not a bad thing to do, to isolate them so you don't accidentally change the attributes of something when you meant to leave it alone. And they block it. If I, on layer one, if I twirl down, use this little twirly here, you can see all the individual elements that this is made up of, all the individual parts. I could have just as easily used construction paper and cut all of these elements out. And now what we're going to do is we go back and to make what you see to the right, we're going to start to layer them on top of them into their final configuration. So it's kind of a gestalt, you know. Sum is greater than the parts. Right? What you see are not parts when you're done. You see a flower. You don't see the individual element. So now what I'll do is I'm just going to start to move some of these. Some of them are independent, so this is independent. And if I move this on top, you can see conveniently they have ordered these for us quite nicely. That this one conveniently is beneath this one. So I can click and I can drag and I can move it in place. And then I can take this one and I can click and I can drag and move it in place. And if it's not quite where I want it, the arrow keys on an extended keyboard will allow you to move up and down, left and right, pixel by pixel. So if I want to nudge this into place, I just hit the down key several times and the right or left key until it fits. Okay? So I'm just going to start to take shapes and I'm going to move them. Now, the recommendation here would be, I see these as a group. Right now, they're individual elements. I can leave them as individual elements and I can click and drag, select them all, and move them over. That would be one thing to do. But if I really don't want them to be moved independently of one another by accident, I might want to take those four elements now and hit Command G so it turns them into a group. And when I do that, watch what happens in the layers panel. Command G. It turns these into a group. It says it's a group. And if you want, each of these, when we get to layers later on, can be named. So when you have a really intricate illustration or drawing that you're constructing, you can come in and you can name all of these parts. And believe me, some of them can be, have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shapes, depending on how detailed you want to make it. Similarly, this one, they have already grouped for us. So I can move this into place like so. And that's pretty nice. Again, it's where I want it. But notice, I need the same element here as I need over here. You don't need to make it again. One of the things that you should do when you're working with computers is try to notice patterns, to try to repetitions that you see happen again and again. Because there are typically techniques available for you to copy and paste or to mirror or to whatever so that you can resize things very quickly and to repeat them over and over and over again without having to actually physically construct them one by one. There's a couple of things that I can do to copy and paste this, make a duplicate of it. And I'll show you the easiest one last. The first one is to select it and go to Edit, Copy, then deselect, and then go to Edit, Paste in front, or just Paste. and you'll notice it puts an exact copy of that in the middle of our screen. Now I can click and I can drag and I can move it in place. And it's really the wrong size, so I'm going to have to resize this. Okay? So that's one way of doing it. Another way to do it that I think is more efficient is to use keystrokes. And I think you want to learn this quickly. And it's an easy one. Is to select what you want, hold down the Alt or Option key, whichever name you feel comfortable with, and then click and drag, and then release. And you'll notice that you've automatically made a copy of it. Now while it's enlarged, I can resize it. And again, when we get to this at the end of the week, there's a whole bunch of ways of resizing it. But what I'm going to do to constrain is I'm going to hold down the Shift key. Because I want it to constrain from the center, I'm also going to hold down the Option key. And then I'm going to click and drag, and it shrinks it down. Okay. Again, the bottom part here, the veins of our leaf are independent. I would want to select them all, group them, Command G, and now move it into place. Notice it's at the wrong angle. Not a problem. Or maybe the leaf is at the wrong angle. It depends on whatever you want to change. I'll move the leaf on this. I want it to pivot from this point down here. Right here. See where the mouse is? So what I can do is I can use over here the rotation tool. This is the next set of tools. And by default, you see the little light blue or kind of greenish blue crosshairs in the middle? That determines where the pivot point is. I want it to pivot from down here. So I click there, and then it's a two-step process. Then I click and drag again. Notice how it pivots from that point. And the farther away you move the mouse, it's like a fulcrum. It's slow. Closer it is, it just spins around. You know, it's hard to control. So the farther away I am, easier it is to control as you move. Release it and I move it. Okay. So now I've made my phone. And if I want, see this is a unit. I could select the whole thing and I could group it so that if I wanted to make duplicates of the flower without accidentally leaving parts behind, I can make copies if I need to use, if I want to select individual elements of the flower and make changes to them. I can use the group selection tool and select individual parts and change colors, size, whatever. It's still part of the group. Does this give you an idea of how you begin to construct? This is very different from Photoshop, very different. Although at some point, you're going to see a blending of the two.
Did you make a copy by clicking it and pressing?
Oh, you just start by selecting it, holding down Option key. Let's select this part here, since that's all grouped together. I want to make a bunch of these. I can hold down the Option key, and then I can click and drag, and then I release the mouse and then the Option key. And it makes a copy.
What was the pivot command again?
The pivot, it's when you rotate, you select the rotate tool.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
two-step process. Now, the last one I've already sort of shown you. Yeah, French bronze. That when you do this from the book, you'll be able to see that, for example, if I select, just this stroke here and I want to change the thickness of it, I can, go to select, and this is all this does, change one star, multiple stars. You can select, and you can select same. So I want to same stroke color, same stroke weight. I'll say stroke color. And see all of the French bronze that have the same color, same weight are selected. Now I can go back and I can change the thickness of them, or do whatever I want them. So maybe I want to make them green or something, and then come back. Make 4 point. Notice that they're all bigger now. So you could just boom very quickly. And the reason that they do this is that as a commercial artist, and that's what, I mean, there are fine artists who use this, but it's about doing things really high quality, but very quickly. Fast turnaround. So the more you use the program, and the more you acclimate yourself to using key commands and thinking the way the programmer wants you to think, in terms of, you know, like this, you know, you can make changes to your illustration much faster and be more productive. And the more you do of the same type of thing, like retouching photos in Photoshop or whatever, you're going to get used to certain methodology that you've developed for yourself. And the more you can refine that and improve upon that, the quicker you become, and the quicker you become, and the better you become, means the more money you make. So, you know, you can use the mouse and click on the tools for the hand tool and stuff all you want, and that's fine, but I think you're going to get tired of it, and gradually you begin to at least use some of the keystrokes. Now, as far as duplicate, there's one little fun thing that I want to show you. To show you how you can think, when you think in terms of repeating things that I show. I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to use the flower as an example. I want to take this one right here. So now I've got that flower in the illustration. And I'm going to shrink it a little bit. So now, what if I wanted these to follow a pattern? I wanted them to, like, the numbers are